Welcome to Revolution Against Evolution. I'm your host, Doug Sharp.
I'm your co-host, Rich Gear, and today we have a very interesting subject. I don't think we've addressed this really in this complete form for a long time. It's the multiple models of creationism, right, Doug?
Well, we're also going to touch the whole gamut of models from atheistic evolution on up.
That's true, but I mean, this is how, basically, origins, if you will, how we got here.
Right.
Whether atheistic evolution to the literal six-day Earth creation. We're going to talk about, which we're going to try to get to all of them, because there's quite a few of them. Jerry's put together a list of 16 variations from atheistic all the way to literal, and even then there's compartments.
Yeah, we're talking about Dr.
Jerry Bergman, yes, and there's so many different, there's a lot more than that, obviously, but these are what he's compiled down. And then there's 6 variants of the last part, which is interesting. So, Doug, without any further ado, why don't you get us started?
Well, what really started this off was a discussion on CRSNet, which is of the Creation Research Society. There is a discussion group, and one of the things that Jerry was bringing up was that there is not just one creation model, and there's been some people who say that we need to be teaching the creation model. Well, what is this? That's the issue.
Yeah.
And I think what it eventually boiled down to is, there's certain qualifications to what you mean by the creation model. And I think we can discuss what Jerry had brought out. There is like 15 or 16 different possible models based upon your view of God and the scriptures, and like the very first two, atheistic evolution and materialistic evolution, that presumes there is no God.
Yeah, I was kind of interested about that, Doug, the idea that I always consider materialistic evolution and atheistic evolution pretty much the same thing. He makes a slight difference between the two things. I didn't really, what exactly is that difference? I'm not really sure what that is.
Well, let's read what he says about
because to me, I kind of equated the two,
He says, atheistic evolution is a position that energy and matter alone can account for the development of the universe, including the earth and all living things. Okay. All that exists is the result of only intrinsic properties of matter, and ultimately, by fortuitous accident, an outside agency or an intelligence is ruled out as not only unnecessary but non-existent.
Okay.
So that's atheistic evolution. Right. Materialistic evolution is where the changes necessary to evolve the universe, the world, and all living things are a result of the operation of time, natural law, and the chance that do not require any control or intervention by an outside power. The outside agency is not ruled out. And so I think in this particular
that last
case,
part's the only difference, because to me,
yeah,
everything else,
panspermia and aliens.
Oh, I see. You could have aliens, okay. Which begs the questions we brought up many times in the past: who created the aliens, right? I mean, that's the real problem.
And such as the search for intelligent life in the universe.
Yeah, SETI project and whatnot. Yeah.
That's what
okay.
That's all about.
Okay, because
until it's not, you're not talking about the God of the Bible or anything of that sort. You also have deism, and that was sort of a popular back around the Enlightenment area, or Endarkenment area.
Late 1700s or so, yeah.
And early 1800s, where you talked about, there's a God that started everything up, but basically he just started the universe and made all these laws, but everything came about by chance.
Yeah, a lot of people think some of our founding fathers, especially Jefferson, was a deist. Although I tell you what, maybe he was, but I tell you, I was looking at the Jefferson Memorial many years back, and the stuff I read on the walls didn't sound like a deist at all. But I understand they talk about the Jefferson Bible where he cuts out all the miracles. But somebody told me he did that because he was trying to get to just merely the words of Christ or something. It's kind of like what we would almost call a red letter edition. I don't know the truth or the veracity of that, but the point of it is that's where deism is kind of got its popular, or at least it might be another myth conception. But
And he makes a distinction between deism and classical deism.
Okay.
And classical deism is where the external power created the original substance of the universe, together with the characteristic properties that endowed it with the potential for development of its major structural components, such as stars. This original creation, once in existence, was subsequently not acted on by any external force, either for its existence or its development.
So is the other deism, there could be interventions from time to time, and this one, once he sets the clock in motion, he basically hands off God's hands. I always thought that was to me the deism I'm familiar with, that supposedly Jefferson ascribed to.
About modified deism.
Oh boy, we got three deisms.
Like classical deism, except that the external God or power may from time to time intervene in the development or maintenance of the material world to affect particular results, or to maintain orderly development toward a specific end. In other words, God sort of keeps his hands off, but he sort of sticks his finger in here once in a while.
Oh, okay, all right. Now, is that, yeah, okay, so
none of these yet are what I would call biblical models.
right.
Then there's what they call limited theistic evolution. Is where an outside force began the world by originally creating matter and the laws needed to begin the process with the direct goal of creating the world as we know it. Once the initial set of creative acts began, the universe was left to develop on its own, like a plant developing out of seed, as designed to produce the adult plant using water and minerals.
That doesn't sound like much different than deism, though, to me.
It doesn't sound a whole lot. Outside intervention is not ruled out at any point in the process in order to fine-tune the system.
So that sounds maybe like the not classical deism, but the with the modified deism. It sounds more like that. The distinction is so. This is pretty subtle to me, but okay, be that as it may. Still not a biblical model.
The theistic evolution is the position that an outside intelligence created all original matter and has directly and deliberately guided evolution to its present day. Much of the living world, though, is a product of natural laws rather than outside guidance. In other words, outside intervention is limited. Now, this is where the institutions of learning start to now dislike this. You know, I think this is where they say, oh, we don't really want to allow a divine
foot in the door. Yeah.
And now they're actually trying to, and so even the intelligent design people, and this is where we're getting a little bit of the talking about God going on. They're starting to get uncomfortable. Theism is the position that all which exists and all the changes that occur within time, regardless of the mechanism of that change, whether instantaneous, a slow process, or some combination of both, depends upon its ultimate existence and continuing moment by moment existence on the constant free activity of God. The universe is separate from God but not independent of him.
Okay.
So here we're now allowing for a God.
A little more. It's like each viewpoint is getting a little more possible of an outside, that is, i.e., God, stepping in its place there. So we're getting a little more. It's still a far cry from what you call the biblical, what the biblical text seems to say. All right.
Now we get into some of the Fuji-Wuji stuff.
Really weird
Pantheism.
stuff. Oh yeah, pantheism.
It's a view that all the reality is essentially a form of divine one. Okay, so that not only God is active in all processes of reality, but since the universe is God, it's pointless to speak of the universe as separate from God.
Right. It's all nature is God. This was really popular again in the late 1700s, early 1800s, 1820s. It was pantheism was a real big. In fact, a lot of your romantic art was sort of pantheistic. They had little human beings in there, and nature was painted big. You know, big grand. They're beautiful paintings. Big Grand Canyonscapes or big forest scenes with little people. That was a direct result of the influence of pantheistic kind of thinking. Like I say, early 1820s, quite a bit. But in other words, God is nature. He's not apart from nature. So he's, in a sense, Doug, it makes God a limited God. Okay.
And here's another one. It's very similar. It's called panentheism.
I know. I saw that panentheism.
And it's like
Yeah.
pantheism, except that God is not exhausted by his identity within the universe,
Oh.
but he's more than the universe.
Okay, in other words, the universe is God, but it's not all God is.
Right.
God is more than that. Okay, fine. Yeah, again, that's kind of subtle, but in other words, something outside of the universe, still it's God. God is all in all. In a sense, believe it or not, Doug, there I can see where you get a little bit. You can get a little. I mean, from the biblical text when it says God will be all in all, but it's always. That statement doesn't mean what this is saying. This is saying still,
Right.
this is really he's wrapped up in the creation. All right. So what's the next one?
Next one is creation by evolution.
Oh, okay. And
so,
that's not theistic evolution.
It's a form of theism, which is in which it's believed that God's activity is best described as forming and sustaining the world in terms of the directed, purposeful development. But it's an evolutionary process.
Oh, I see. So God's
Rather than
involved in it, but he's
creation by
usually...
instantaneous creation from nothing.
Okay.
All the initial steps may be described as creation from nothing. An aged universe is accepted.
Yeah. See, this is where a lot of times we get a lot of stuff, Doug. It seems to me there are a lot of similarities between that and deistic type of things. They're really, I mean, sometimes it feels like you're splitting hairs, except that they're, in this part, it looks like they're beginning to acknowledge the biblical text in a little bit. I don't know if they are or not, but it sounds like they are, where the other one really is not so much,
A lot of times at that point they really don't care about the biblical text.
I know they really don't, but I'm just saying that it allows for that. You can use some of that stuff in there. Okay, what's the next one?
Initial creationism. The form of theism which is believed that God's activity is best as forming and sustaining the world by a series of many instantaneous creation events.
Oh, okay. So
materialistic laws and systems, but not complete organisms. At the beginning of Earth's history. And so all subsequent development occurs by an evolutionary process.
oh, so this would this be a way to kind of understand the Cambrian explosion or something, or
I
what?
think so, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. Because
These are more intelligent design people, I think.
they are
that
okay.
starting to-
All right. Okay.
to talk about this.
Yeah. All right.
A progressive creationism, where many creations by an outside agency at different times throughout history occurred. And so these are ex nihilo creations.
Ex nihilo means out of nothing for those who aren't familiar with the term. Okay.
They were limited, and much of the present natural world is purely a result of natural laws. And the series of instantaneous creation events were dispersed somewhat evenly in historic time, and what development occurred, if any, they were done by evolutionary process. And they usually accepted a long age.
age, yeah, okay, all right.
Then you have special or direct creationism, where all basic kinds or species are the result of a direct and purposeful creation within a rather defined period by God.
This is getting closer to what we would subscribe to.
Special creation implies a purpose for humankind and a fairly high level of guidance in the formation of the natural world as we know it. Special creationists believe that only limited changes had occurred since the original creation, and they attribute such changes to variation or reshuffling of existing genetic information within the gene pool.
See, that's getting closer to what we subscribe to, but it's still not quite there, is it?
Yeah, and
it's pretty close.
Allows for an appearance of age.
Of age, yeah.
Literal creationism is similar to special or direct creationism, except the instantaneous creation events are believed to have taken place in 6 24-hour days, around 6,000 to 10,000 years ago.
So the other one doesn't have the 6 24-hour days?
That could have been, and actually you could split the other one into a couple of them, a day-age theory or a gap theory.
He gets into that in the bottom here, Doug, when he starts going in the special creation. He gets he talks about the gap theory and a little bit of the day-age. We'll get into that in a second. And we've talked about it before as well, but we'll bring it up again a little bit, so we'll clarify terms. And it's important to tell you what, this is really a good yeoman service, Doug, because I think we need to understand. I think the way cults get started and cultic type thinking is people who use the same terms, and they mean two different things. And so we need to explain where we come. We're pretty clear on what we come from. We're the,
Right, yeah.
we're a young Earth, 6-day, pretty much 24. I mean, it is not pretty much. It is 24-hour periods of time.
And we also believe that the history of Genesis, if you can connect the dots, going back to the beginning.
I believe the Gospel of Luke, which has a genealogy from Adam to Jesus, and it's unbroken, is a real genealogy. I used to tell people, I said, when did the genealogy in Luke go from real people to fake people?
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, this whole thing begs the question. The Bible cannot be more clear that the world is fairly young. Okay, I think this is why you and I have become convinced of it for many years. These other things, a lot of these, Doug, are either people who've rejected any kind of biblical presuppositions, or they have basically tried to compromise with the biblical text. Okay, until we getting down to some of these now. All right, so what else we got?
Okay, divine fiat creationism is where the universe and everything in it is a result of direct, instantaneous creative act by an outside agency or God. Divine fiat creationists do not allow for either micro or macro evolution, and they insist that extremely little or if any change has taken place since the original creation. Most divine fiat creationists hold to a literal 6-day, 24-hour day creation week 6,000 years ago.
See, that sounds like a lot of times what we've been accused of promoting, Doug. I would subscribe. I say, are you telling me that every kind of different dog was on the ark? Right. See, there are issues when you do that kind of, and we look foolish when we do that. And it's not because I'm trying to use the world's viewpoints, but direct observation. We can see we can breed different kinds of dogs.
Right. Yeah.
So this is like something we can see in front of our eyes. It's observable, testable, repeatable. I'm not trying to impose it upon Scripture. Scripture seems to indicate there were 2 of every kind, kind, 7 of many of the clean animals. And you can go into what that means between regular and what animals are what. But the point of it is, Doug, it seems to me that is that's what we used to be a fixity of species. Right. It almost sounds to me like what that is. In other words, all the species they stay what they are from the very beginning, and there's no change. And yet, right in front of us, we can see people breeding different kinds of flowers and roses and dogs and horses. And that there is no fixation there. There is movement there.
Yeah, well, there are certain battles that we don't really need to fight because
it's ridiculous.
The scriptures aren't that clear. It's like trying to prove a geocentric solar system.
Oh, you mean from Daniel or Joshua's Long Day? You mean, or something? But
well, like. Everything revolves around the
I know, but I'm saying because the sun stood still, right. People try to put. Well, the point of it is that look, we know the Bible uses a lot of different forms of language, terms or not terms, but parts of speech. It uses hyperbole and metaphor and parable and symbol and all kinds of stuff is in there. But we also know that the Bible, when it's written, narrative prose is a different kind of language construct than metaphor or parable. It's just or even apocalyptic literature. I have no problem that you can find symbolic meaning in passages of Genesis, but it's straightforward. Original intention is pretty much narrative prose. It's history. Right. That Paul takes the book of Exodus, for instance, book of Exodus, and Hagar, who gets thrown out, right? But Paul uses Hagar as a metaphor for Sinai of Arabia. Of the Jews who rejected Christ. He was using, and I thought that's kind of really almost a counterintuitive way to do it. But Hagar was a real person, okay? Even though Paul is using the New Testament with a metaphorical meaning to put it. I don't have issues you could do that, but you can't impose metaphor into Genesis chapter 1 and 2 and make that obliterate the clear meaning of the narrative prose text. You just don't do that. But the thing is, on the other hand, then there's the other part of what we're just talking about. You're hyper-literalizing, you're imposing something on there that the Scripture is not saying. It's not saying there is no change that happens over time. Things do change. We have no issue with that problem, with that statement. What we have an issue with is the clear lines that Scripture seems to indicate. A human is not going to come up from a gorilla. or an ape-like hominid. It's not going to, you're not going to have an amoeba turning into a bird with millions or even billions of years in between. It's not going to happen. There are certain things, there are limits. Okay?
Now, I would say in all of these that we've just discussed here.
Did you get to the bottom of them? Did you get all of them?
Well, that's all of them. We haven't discussed the
fine tunes. We'll get to that in a second.
Of the young Earth creation models.
Right. Okay.
But what I'm talking about right now is there's a dividing line that is Jesus Christ. If you believe that Jesus is Lord, and that he was who he said he was the Son of God,
right? Yep.
And he is actually God. If you believe Jesus has come in the flesh, then that eliminates about 2/3 of these.
Pretty much, yeah.
It eliminates deism. Deism is basically saying, well, acknowledging there's a God, but it doesn't have anything to do with Jesus.
No, that's true. Yeah.
And of course, atheistic evolution
and materialistic evolution, and so that's 5. But there are 3 deistic things you talked about, and there are 2 atheistic and materialistic evolution. That's 5 right there gone.
And in many cases, you have intelligent design people who argue for existence of a intelligent designer, but they don't.
They try to leave out the God of the Bible.
Right.
Yes, that's its weakness. They would consider it a strength because it has allowed them a chance to get in certain classrooms where young Earth creationists could never get in, even old Earth creationists. Yet I think sometimes they sell the birthright for a bowl of pottage when they do that, because down the road when you look at it, I remember it was many years ago, Doug. There was a debate. It was on the State Journal. I remember that, and they were talking about and how God was either impotent or cruel, based on this idea that we have all this bad stuff. If you don't understand that there was a fall, and God allowed that to happen, and He cursed the world, and you say, "Oh, that's evil God." Nobody was subjected it to futility, with the hope of redemption and eternal redemption. That's the gift we have. You're right about Jesus Christ is the line of demarcation. He is the line that makes it, and it makes it clear. Then He's neither impotent nor cruel. He's subjected to futility for a season. For us, it's hard because it's our whole life. But then, in the scheme of things, it's nothing.
When you get down to a Christian worldview, where you have people who have accepted Jesus Christ, now we have a number of things. Can we trust the Scriptures? Well, that's the next thing, and there's a lot of people who sort of bifurcate their mind into little compartments.
This is where we get into the little fine tunes here, Doug. Right, I think the gaps and the day age stuff, we get into, and it's kind of like sometimes people, if they're not careful, they'll think we're doing like the medieval scholars, arguing about how many angels can sit on the head of a pin. But it's a little more critical than that, because, Doug, in this kind of situation, we're not talking about a subjective. Bible never doesn't even talk about how many angels can sit on the head of a pin, but it does talk about how He created the world. It talks about how He created the universe. It talked about how we are the center of this creation, humankind. We're not some cosmic blip at the end of a bunch of accidents, or we're not something left off to our own devices. Suddenly, here we are, we're here, God. But no, it was purposeful from the very beginning, and He told it. And it's not about, well, couldn't God have created it and with millions of years? He could have done anything He wanted to, but He tells you pretty clearly how He did it and how long it took for Him to do it. It's not really that hard, except for other things that have been imposed upon the Scripture, okay?
Like the gap theory.
And the gap theory. Let's talk about the gap theory, Doug. We've talked about it in the past, but I think it works for us. Is that the one he first starts with on this thing?
I think he does. The gap theory is where you have a million. They fit the millions of years of Earth history into between the first 2 verses.
Yeah, between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. They don't say the earth was without form and void. They say the earth became without form and void.
Right.
And most Hebrew scholars reject that position. But the fact is, it was only imposed on after Darwin and Lyell and those guys came in there, and they were trying to figure out how to explain all these great canyons and
I think
fossils.
The gap theory, though, actually came before Darwin and Lyell, and
But there was already you had a tranquil flood theories. There was a lot of things I agree with you. Yeah, it did come before that. Wait, what, 1820s when it was 18?
actually
1700s?
late 1700s.
Yeah, late 1700s. That's when all bets are off. With that time period, everything went.
Voltaire and these.
Sorry, Doug. Late 1700s when everything went to hell in a handbasket. Literally, everything changed. Even there was a PBS special years ago called "The Day the Universe Changed," and that's late 1700s. The gap theory, though, Doug, puts these millions, and of course, we as a young Earth creation viewpoint realize any theory that has millions and billions of years of dying and death and suffering, this is a cruel God. Okay,
right,
but more importantly than that, the Scripture is very clear that death did not precede the creation of the first man and woman, Adam and Eve. You know, and so if you have death and dying before that, you've negated clear words of Scripture, as I understand it. I've tried to get around that. I've tried to get around it, but I'm trying to see if there's a reasonable way around it without really stretching it. There isn't.
Day-age theory is similar to that.
Yes.
But it tries to fit and make the days of creation and stretch them out into long periods of time, and that doesn't work very well.
And Doug, I'll give this caveat too. I'm not trying to hammer people to subscribe to those. Oftentimes, these are honorable people trying to figure out. They didn't have the scientific background or the wherewithal to do it. Doug, when we went to South Africa the first time, almost all of them were gap theorists.
Right. Yeah.
That we ran into. 6 years later, we came in there. It was like, holy mackerel! They're all young Earth creationists. Their eyes were open to the death before Adam, and I've had people say, "I never thought of that." So a lot of these people, Doug, I think they were ignorant, but they weren't willfully ignorant. What I call people willfully ignorant is people who read the Scriptures and still hold on to these theories because they were taught as a kid when it clearly contradicts the clear meaning of Scripture, I think. But
so part of it, what we need to do is to take the Scriptures as straightforward as we can in a straight interpretation. Read it as a child would read it. I think the more that we do something like that, the closer we're going to get to the truth. We don't have to read into the Scriptures anything. We need to need to pray that God will give us understanding.
Yeah.
And that's really what it is. We have a God who is personal, who is involved in our lives. He does interact with us. He is our Creator. He sustains us every day. Everything that we do is as a result of Him.
You know, Doug, I'll tell you what, we have a propensity as human beings to complicate something that's fairly simple.
Right.
And that's why you take it as a child reads it, and you'll never get long ages or gap theories or deism or any of these stuff. You'll get basically there's a God who loves us, created us, made us in His image a short while ago.
That's right. And I think that we don't have to worry about reading into Scripture something that really isn't there, because God gave us the Scriptures for that purpose.
Yes, He did.
And He is able to show us through His Scriptures what the model for His creation actually is.
Yep.
Well, we hope you enjoyed our time on Revolution Against Evolution tonight. We'll see you next time.